Thanks to each and every one of you for being here. I want to begin by sharing a story that will make a point. There was a young man named Antonio who lived in Rome, the capital city of Italy. Antonio was a third-generation pizza maker, and he now owned the family shop. It happened to be right across the street from the Vatican. It was Antonio's dream to have the Pope call and order a pizza from him. And every day he put himself into his pizza making. He made a pizza like if it would be delivered to the Pope. And he put such love and heart into it. The food was incredible. The business grew. But year after year it went by, and he loved what he did, but the Pope just never seemed to call until finally, 20 years later, they got a phone call one day, and sure enough, it was the Pope himself wanting to order a specialty pizza from John. No, not John, from Antonio, who also... It's the Italian thing, John. So Antonio put everything just every piece of thing that he put on the pizza, he cared for it, he baked it to perfection, he put it in the box, and he rushed out the door ready to cross the street, and lo and behold, there's a parade, and he can't get across the street. But he sees a guy, Stefano, that he went to high school with, who was a police officer. He ran up and he said, "Stefano, you have to help me. Would you please stop this parade? I must cross the street." And he said, "You have to be kidding. There's no way I'm going to stop this parade for you." And he explained why, how he had waited, and he had this pizza for the Pope. And Stefano said, "If I do this, you're going to owe me a big one." He said, "Listen, whatever the Pope gives me, I will give you half." And he said, "Okay, I'll do that." He stopped the parade, let Antonio cross. He went in, he gave his pizza to the Pope. The Pope was incredibly happy, enjoyed it. He spent time with him, and Stefano came back. He was so excited, or Antonio came back. He was so excited. Stefano was there waiting for him, and he said, did the Pope like it? Yes, he liked it. Are you happy? Yes, I'm so fulfilled. Did the Pope give you anything? Yes. And he said, "Give me my half." And he said, "Get ready." And he went. And so he gave him half of the sign of the cross. What point am I making with that? The point is, do you ever feel like that there's more to life? That somehow you only have half of what you know has to be available, that there's something missing. You feel like that there's just another dimension of your life, perhaps, that you've not really opened up to yet, that you feel like you're only getting half of what there is. We often say things, it's a very popular saying to say that we are spiritual beings having a human experience. And that's very true. But it's also true to say we are spiritual beings having a spiritual experience. And that's what we want to talk about today, that as a spiritual being having a spiritual and human experience, it requires spiritual vision, spiritual perception, spiritual insight. It requires an ability to see beyond appearances, to see more than the eyes can see. It requires realizing that imagination is one of our spiritual gifts, that insight is a spiritual gift, and that intuition is a spiritual gift, and that all of these are part of our capacity as a spiritual being. This is significant today because today is week 6 of a 7-week spring series where we have focused on the Hindu teaching of the chakra system, how we are a being of energy and that there are 7 primary ways that we can realize how we show up in the world. It's simply a model for understanding ourselves. This happens to correlate perfectly with the 7 churches in the book of Revelation. And we've been looking at each of these. And so today we are on the 6th chakra, which is called the brow chakra, or more popularly called the third eye. It's what Jesus referred to as the single eye. Do you know that if you look on your dollar bill and you see that eye, that the all-seeing eye of God is a symbol that has been popular for many, many years in many different cultures. It's that God is seen as an eye, and that to see and to perceive with the eye of God is the ultimate goal of humanity, if you will. And so it's about realizing that to get beyond any obstacle in our life requires insight. So there's a few things we want to look at. The first is just to remember that only spiritual vision can recognize spiritual realities. The second slide, the next slide, is a quote by Emerson that says, "People only see what they are prepared to see." The third is a quote from the Gospel of Luke. "Your eye is the lamp of the body. When your eyes are healthy, your whole body also is full of light. But when your eyes are unhealthy, the body is full of darkness. See to it then that the light within you is not darkness." To let your light shine is to be willing to be a holder of a higher level of insight. And then likewise in the Jewish Talmud, it says, "We do not see things as they are, we see things as we are." And finally, I like this. To me, this next slide says it all. That our perception really is reality. You probably have heard the story of the 4 blind men who were each sharing their perception of and ideas of what an elephant was like. The first blind man reached and he touched the elephant's tail and he said, "Oh, I see, an elephant is like a rope." The second blind man reached and he touched the elephant's leg and he said, "No, the elephant is not like a rope, the elephant is like a tree." And then the third blind man reached in and he touched the elephant's side and he said, "No, no, no. An elephant is not like a rope or a tree. It is like a great wall." And then the fourth one reached in and he touched the elephant's trunk and he said, "No, you're all wrong. The elephant is not like a rope or a tree or a wall. It is like a water hose." And each of these were accurate in their description according to their unique perception. And likewise, you and I are only in touch with part of the picture. You know, have you ever, 2 people can walk into the exact same situation and have 2 very different experiences. 2 people can drive up to an accident and see 2 very different things. We all see based on our conditioning and our capacities to see. There's a quote that says, "Every man takes the limits of his own field of vision for the limits of the world." Marianne Williamson wrote, "You have a physical set of eyes and a spiritual set of eyes. With your physical eyes, you can see the material world, but there is more to life than the material world. With your spiritual eyes, you see beyond appearances. You see into the realm of divine possibility, and by seeing a new possibility, you invoke it." See, that's powerful. Quantum science tells us that. Is it a wave or is it a particle? What does it depend on? The observer. Is the observer looking for a wave or a particle? By seeing a new possibility, you invoke it. Instead of allowing appearances to determine what you think is real, use your spiritual eyes to see into the realm of divine possibilities. And so the questions we look at today is to realize and to ask ourselves the question, how far does my vision, my spiritual vision, allow me to see? How much does my vision allow me to take in? And does my vision allow me to see beyond appearances? Aldous Huxley said, "There are things known and there are things unknown, and in between are the doors of perception." I remember as a child, I would go to my granny. We called her Granny. She had lots of grandchildren, and I just loved spending time with my granny. And in her home, one of the things I was fascinated, she had this little kind of plastic white placard with blue raised letters that said, "Expect a miracle." And for whatever reason, as a child, I was drawn to that. I'd go over and pick it up and hold it and play with it. And one day, I was at my granny's house, and I was holding that, and I said, "Granny, what kind of miracle are you expecting?" And she said, "Well, there's really only one miracle." And I said, "Really? What is that?" And she said, "To see God." I thought, "Oh, you mean after you die?" It was not so appealing anymore. Ugh. And she said, "No, honey, not after you die. To see God everywhere, to see God in every face, to see God in every circumstance, to see the beautiful handiwork of God. My granny was a seamstress and she was sewing at the time, and I began to think about, I wonder if God is like that thread then that holds us all together. But to see God, that was the one miracle, was to see God in everything. What profound wisdom that she was sharing with me. Alexandria Catechus says, when we are able to look beyond appearances and to behold that which we truly are, we recognize that our essence is interwoven with the divine and that we exist as one of its expressions. That our existence is interwoven, that there's no way we can separate, that all that we are is an expression of God. And so to see God is to also see our true nature. And so the question we ask ourselves then is, how do we begin to develop spiritual insight? How do we begin to, spiritual insight is a range. It ranges from the willingness and the capacity to see the divine within another, even when they're acting like something else. It's the willingness to see the divine within our own self, even when we're showing up and acting like something else. It's the willingness and ability to look outside and to look at every expression of nature and to see God. It also includes what we call clear seeing, the ability to see beyond the physical realm when people are able to see, to predict. The Bible was full of spiritual seers, people that could interpret dreams, people that could see things. And so these things are also part of a developed single eye or a third eye, or developing our spiritual vision. And as it happens naturally as we begin to open up and begin to see God in all things. So the first thing that we would consider when we're developing our spiritual vision is very much like physical vision. What you can see depends on where you are standing. You ever been standing trying to see something? I remember as a little kid one time I was at a Christmas thing at my granny's Methodist church on Christmas Eve. And some of the older kids were standing and they were looking out the window and they were saying, "Oh, look, there's Santa. Oh my gosh, look, Santa's right here." And I was a little thing and I was jumping for all of my might to get up and see, and I could not see. And so I ran and found my parents and I said, "We must leave right now. Santa is circling the building. We have to leave right now." I don't remember what they did, but I remember that was just anguish of not being able to see something that I wanted to see. Well, just like that in the physical world, have you had that experience in your life? When you needed to see, you needed some kind of insight, you needed guidance, there's something you needed to be able to see differently. In the Gospels, one of the most well-known characters in the Gospel is called Paul. We have probably all heard of the Apostle Paul. But before Paul was known as Paul, he was known as Saul. And you probably know that in the Bible, in the Scriptures, a name was representative of a person's nature. And anytime a person was given a name change, it meant they had a dramatic change in nature. Abram became Abraham. Different people's name changed. Saul became Paul. What you may not know about Saul when he was a young Saul, these words are ascribed to him and they come from Galatians. This is what Paul was saying. "You may have heard of my previous way of life in Judaism, how intensely I persecuted the church of God and I tried to destroy it. I was advancing in Judaism beyond many my own age among my people, and I was extremely zealous for the traditions of my father." Here you had a person who was extremely dedicated, extremely zealous, extremely committed. But what was he committed to? He was committed to destroying anyone who was not following the point and the letter of the Jewish law as the scribes and the Pharisees understood it. And so Jesus and his followers, Paul was their biggest adversary. From the Gospel of Acts. "But Paul, threatening with every breath and eager to destroy every Christian, went to the high priest in Jerusalem. He requested a letter to the synagogue in Damascus requiring their cooperation in the persecution of any believer found there, both men and women, so that he could bring them in chains to Jerusalem. He wanted to destroy them. As he was nearing Damascus on a mission, suddenly a brilliant light from heaven shone down upon him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice saying, "Paul, Paul, why are you persecuting me?" "Who is speaking?" Paul asked, and the voice replied, "I am the Christ. You are the one who is seeking to persecute." And it says, he arose from the ground, and though his eyes were open, he could not see. For 3 days he was blind. He could not see. Finally, he followed some guidance, and he met an individual, and eventually it says he could see again as he was filled with the Holy Spirit, and the scales fell from his eyes. Now, we in Unity look at the Bible symbolically, that these characters are telling us something about our nature. Paul represents those places in our life when we are blinded by our own judgments. When we are blinded by the way we see things, that we're stuck seeing them in a certain way. Have you ever literally been blinded because that was the only way you could see it? And so when he's blinded in judgment, the only thing that can change that is an insight. And the Holy Spirit, that the whole Spirit of God that is available in every person, is always seeking to bring us new insight. How many of you can recall a time in your life when something wasn't working, you needed to be able to see a new way, and something happened, something shifted, and you were able to see a new way? I think most everyone in this room has had experiences on different scales of magnitude of being able to experience that. All of that happens in our life. And you see, for him, so when we ask ourselves, where am I standing? Anytime we're stuck, just to ask myself, am I standing in judgment? Am I standing in fear? Am I standing in anything that's keeping me from able to see the bigger picture? And help me be able to stand and hold and anchor in a new realization. I had a young woman in my church, my first church in Kansas. I was near a university, and quite often the university students would come over. Sometimes they'd stay. Sometimes they were there on an assignment, depending on what their major happened to be. This young woman was from Korea. She came to the church as part of her university assignment, and she completed the assignment, but she heard something that began to change her life. She started coming Sunday after Sunday. Her name was Eunice. And Eunice asked if she could meet and talk with me. And when I met with Eunice, she said, "If I am understanding you correctly, you're saying that I have a soul." Now, I was floored. It never dawned on me that there may be a person in the congregation that did not believe or know they had a soul. But this young woman, coming from a different culture, had no idea that she was a spiritual being, that the Spirit of God was in her. And it's as if a light went off inside of her entire world. And she said, "Well, if I have a soul, then everybody has a soul, correct?" And she began to light up, and that was so important to her. Well, as she shared her story with me, the reason that was important, she had been abandoned when she was a young child in Korea. She had had a horrible life, and her own family had rejected her. She had grown up with a lot of judgment, a lot of hurt, a lot of things that had blinded her. Not intentionally. But you see, the whole Spirit of God, the Holy Spirit, is always seeking for scales to come off of our eyes. And that young girl was guided somewhere for a period of time to hear a message. When she left, she asked to meet with me again, and she said, "You know what I've learned? There are no bad people, just people in bad places." How profound. How profound is that? Where are we standing? The first thing to ask ourselves every day is, where am I standing? Without judgment, are there any places that I'm standing that are keeping me stuck? And just to look up, to offer that up. The second thing that really has a lot to do with what we can see is, where are we looking? What direction? If you're expecting someone to come from this direction, you're certainly not going to stand out and wait in this direction. What we look and where we focus has a lot to do with what we see. Michelle Longo O'Donnell is a founder of a holistic health care center in Austin, Texas, San Antonio, Texas. When I was in seminary, she came out and gave a presentation, and I was blown away by her. Michelle was the head ICU nurse in a hospital. Michelle never went to church. Her father was a general in the Marine Corps. She grew up strict and worked hard, and that's what life was to her. Michelle had an 18-month-old baby and was pregnant with her second as the head of the ICU. When her second daughter was born, they induced labor. The child was born at 2.5 pounds. The first night, the child went into cardiac arrest 5 times. The child had a lung disease, wasn't getting sufficient air. They came to Michelle and they said, Michelle, we need to just let your daughter go. Michelle said, if I had not been the head nurse of the pediatric ICU, they would have let my daughter go. And she said, it wasn't that I wasn't willing, but something inside of me said no. And so because she was who she was, they kept this child alive, but at the time they labeled her severely mentally retarded. Michelle had to go home, quit her job, take care of this newborn baby who was labeled as severely mentally retarded, and an 18-month-old. Her husband couldn't handle it, he left. She winds up having to find somebody's basement to live in, trying to survive. And she said that she never really accepted that her daughter was not going to be okay. It wasn't a prayer for her, it wasn't a spiritual thing, it's just something she knew. And she carried that daughter and she went around with her, and when her daughter was 6 or 9 months old, I don't remember exactly, but you'll get to meet Michelle. She's coming here. We're going to do something together this fall. But her daughter one day just lifted up her head and just like that was completely healed. Her daughter has since become the assistant Attorney General for the state of Texas. So Michelle was set on this path of healing, and what is this power and what is this presence that made this happen? And so as a part of this, as a part of her waking up to her understanding of a higher power, one night she had been terribly sick with pneumonia, so sick that she, in the coughing, broke some of her ribs and was in terrible pain and basically passed out on the sofa one night, and she had a dream, and this is what she writes in her book of Monkeys and Dragons about her dream. She said, in my dream, I was standing on a golden path on top of a mountain, in the midst of a large mountain range like the Alps. I saw that path winding up each mountainside and disappear over the top, only to reappear off in the distance on another mountain. I thought, oh, I have so far to go. I noticed that on both sides of the path, right at my feet, were many monkeys. They were chattering so loudly and so incessantly that they were setting my nerves on edge. They were also starting to bite my legs and my feet and making them bleed. I was jumping and dancing around, trying to shake them loose when I heard, "Don't look at the monkeys. Look straight down the path ahead." I remember how painfully difficult it was for me to look away from those scary, vexing monkeys. I was sure that if I looked away, they would eat me alive. But the longer it took, the worse it became. So I finally gathered all my strength and I looked toward the path. The instant I did, the monkeys literally became paralyzed and silent. Right in midair, they froze. Curiosity drew me to look back at them again, and immediately they began to chatter and nip and bite at me. So I looked away quickly and they froze again. I did this back and forth several times, each time with the same results. So I began to walk down the path, careful to look only straight ahead. The monkeys remained frozen beside me. Suddenly, as I approached the top of the first mountain, 2 fire-breathing dragons appeared. They were pawing and clawing the earth as they drew closer to either side of me. They were terrifying and fierce, and it was my turn to freeze. Closer and closer they came until I was sure they would certainly devour me. Suddenly I knew that no matter how difficult it was for me to take my eyes off of the dragons and place them and make my feet go exactly on the path in front of me, I knew that's what I had to do. So with more fear than I can describe gripping at my heart, I forced my eyes away and towards the path in front of me. Immediately the dragons froze in midair. I never looked towards them again. Staring straight ahead with my eyes fixed on the path in front of me, I walked on to safety. When I woke from my dream, I realized immediately that all the symptoms of disease, fever, and pain were gone. I was strong and refreshed as though I had never been sick before. She says, this is the principle of life, to keep your heart and your eyes and your hope on the path of life before you. Though you may have to deal with some of the symptoms and some of the things going on, never let it let yourself become mesmerized by it. Never stare at it long enough for it to become part of who you are deep down inside. I share that story with you because to me it makes a powerful point about where are we looking? What is the power of our focus? Spiritual power is not a force that enables you to overthrow negative conditions. Spiritual power is spiritual insight, giving you whatever is needed to transcend negative appearances. Don't let physical sight keep you from seeing with spiritual eyes. You see, that's what I believe Jesus meant and taught when he said, to be able to see beyond appearances. Judge not by appearances. Don't you let your life be shaped by what you see. It doesn't mean that we don't tend to the facts at hand, but it means that we don't become mesmerized them. We don't let them define us, because what are we focused on? We're focused on the spiritual truth that I am an expression of all that is. That my life is sourced by the one's life. That whatever I need healing with, whatever I need guidance, it can and will come to me as I remember and I keep asking myself, where am I standing? Am I standing in the willingness to learn and grow and see? And where am I focused? Am I focused on what I know to be true? Where am I standing? Where am I focused? And then the third part on that song. The third one is to ask yourself, are my spiritual eyes open to see? When I was a kid growing up in eastern North Carolina, every year we would alternate vacations. We'd come to the mountains of North Carolina or the beach. We lived close to the beach. But we usually would come to the mountains. It would be when we as kids were out of school in June, July, maybe August. We had never been in the fall. My parents had never been in the fall. And they wanted to come in the fall to see the beauty that we hear about in western North Carolina. So one fall we made a short trip to western North Carolina. And we saw the beautiful leaves and it was a glorious day. And while we were driving in the car, I remember my father pulled over. We must have been on the parkway probably, and he pulled over and we got out. And we had been taking pictures. Remember the old cameras where you had to keep shoving batteries in? Well, the batteries died and we couldn't get any more pictures. And my mother said, children, just take it in. Just take in the beauty of it. And as we began to leave, my mother took off her glasses and she said, thank you, Lord, for eyes to see the beauty handiwork that you have made. And even as a little child, that really struck my heart. It struck something in me of her taking time to acknowledge in her way the God of her being. For her, that was thank you, Lord, for letting me see. You see, in our lives, cultivating the capacity to see happens every day, 1,000,000 times a day. To be willing to, whatever we're looking at, to slow down a little bit and to think about this beautiful place that we live is truly the handiwork of creation, and we are part of its very fabric. That every situation that we're looking at, to begin to see God in all those things. In the Gospel of Thomas, saying number 5, Jesus is accredited as saying, recognize what is before you, and what is hidden from you will be revealed to you. For there is nothing hidden that will not be made manifest. Recognize what is right before our eyes. This week, our opportunity is to bring awareness to spiritual vision. Where do you need vision in your life? To consider, where am I standing? Where am I focused? And are my eyes open to see? And as my eyes are open to see, I'm naturally in touch with gratitude. Because as I see and recognize God in all things, I will be further developed and able to see and recognize God in all ways. This song is to help us anchor this in a time of meditation, and it says, open my eyes, light of God. It goes like this. Open my eyes, light of God. Let me see truth. Open my eyes, love of God. Let me see as you see. Join with me. Open my eyes, light of God. Let me see see true. Open my eyes, love of God. Let me see as you see. Yes, open my eyes, light of God. Let me see